Hello, everybody, and happy Earth Day. Welcome to Hike and Draw. Today's class is going to be focused on what we can do as artists to explore and cultivate uh, different areas of knowledge with the things that excite us about our planet. Earth Day is a very important holiday. Every day should be Earth Day, but it's just nice that we all have a day in which we can acknowledge the mothership we call planet Earth. In case you don't know me, my name is James Sisti. I'm a professional artist and wilderness guide. Today, I have the privilege of being your instructor. So I'm going to start this workshop with a question, and that question is, why is art an important part of exploration? And that's something, again, I want everybody to meditate on throughout the course of this workshop because it's going to tie in with our goal. And once we go through all of that stuff, we're going to do a warm-up exercise where we go over our drawing practice, our drawing system. And we're going to talk about developing your practice in not only so much in the form of your own drawing, but also in ways in which you can help mentor other people who are aspiring artists as well. We're going to do several field sketching exercises, so we do have some nature journaling to do. And then we're going to talk about how you can share your discoveries and keep the conversation going. After that, we'll have announcements and closing. So circling back to the question, why is art an important part of exploration? Really, it's been a part of the history of human storytelling since time began. We look at cave paintings on the walls in areas like France and Africa, and even in Asia, there are cave paintings that predate modern civilization. And it just goes to say, there's a certain spark of creativity in all of us that kind of also begs the other question, why do we feel the need to communicate through images? And if you think about it, it's sort of a universal language. It helps people to understand things, and it frames a context around a personal experience. Even throughout history, explorers have relied on either their own artistic ability or the artistic ability of professionals to illustrate their discoveries for things like books, public exhibitions, scientific publications. And even though we are in a computer age where we can render pretty much anything the human imagination can come up with, artists are still depended upon to depict important events in the distant past, such as prehistoric times, deep time, as you call it, as well as conceptualizations of things that could possibly occur in the future. We had a very exciting Mars landing last month, and it just goes to show you the imagination knows no bounds. And artists are enlisted to help people visualize what could be. And since we have the ability as artists to depict ordinary things in extraordinary ways, it really captures people's attention and brings their imagination along for the ride and offers new perspectives on things. And that's a really important thing to think about, especially on Earth Day. How can we as artists help capture people's imaginations and spread a message that speaks about caring about the earth, but also about exploring the earth and learning from the earth as well? So our goal for today is, of course, to form a deeper connection with the natural world by nature drawing, by learning about things through direct and focused observation. Going outside and hiking is just part of the experience. You need intention and you need focus, and there's no better way to engage those two elements than by focusing on a drawing. And speaking of that, it's sort of been my experience over the past year doing this, that it really opens up other areas of interest, because you can start off with a single area of focus, and before you know it, you're branching out in 10 different directions. So keep that in mind too as we continue through our practice today. How many ways in which have you grown as an artist? Maybe you started off with birds and now you're doing botanical drawing, things like that. How many ways has your practice branched off over the past year? So without further ado, we're going to start our warm-up exercise. Take out your pencil and paper, and we're going to go ahead and start we're going to start our drawing, but we're also going to explore a few avenues of inquiry. And we're going to think a little bit more outside the box as we do this drawing. We're going to ask a couple of questions, and we're going to try to find some answers just through deduction and via direct observation. All right. So I had sent out reference photos in the email before the class. I've also posted them on the Eventbrite page. But in case you haven't received the email yet, I'm going to go ahead and drop. Whoops! I'm going to go ahead and drop my. And I share my camera first. Oh, skipping ahead here. There we go. I'm going to drop the reference photo in the chat so that everybody can access it. And that way, here we go. We can all be on the same page. Great. So what we're looking at over there is, and I'm going to share my screen again. Sorry about that, just so you can see. What we're looking at right now is a fungi. It's the yellow-orange fly agaric mushroom, or Amanita muscaria. Now, these types of organisms can tell us a lot about the environment that they're in. And not only is this an indicator of a dark, moist environment, but it's also an indicator that this is most likely growing next to a tree that has a lot of sap, like a pine, for example. Okay, so if you look closely at that image, what do you see on top of the cap? What do you see on the root? What are those things telling you, right? It could be sap. There are also what looks like some green growth happening around the organism as well. So those green growths, that looks like moss. And we're starting to also see what could possibly even be lichen forming on a rock next to it, right? So there's a lot happening. It's more than just a mushroom in a picture, right? So I just put this photo in the chat, so download it and have it open in another screen so that we can go ahead and start drawing together. And I'm going to share my top-down camera here. I'm only going to be using my technical pencil for this one. And I have a piece of binder paper, and I like to keep all my drawings organized. So I also like to use as little paper as possible. So I'll fold my 8x10 page in half, and I'll start by creating a margin. It's really handy to have everything in a organized manner. I enjoy having a binder filled with a year's worth of drawings, and it's kind of cool watching the growth happen, because the more you do this, the better you get. The more time you spend, the more you learn. And it's just really interesting looking back and seeing where we all were last May compared to today. So today's Earth Day. So let's go ahead and put the date in the upper right-hand corner. Today's the 22nd. Happy Earth Day. And let's go ahead and begin by giving ourselves a little bit of room to work in. All right, so we have a area right here, this space where we're going to be drawing our mushroom. So we're going to calculate the height and width of this specimen just using our best judgment. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, I want you to also notice how it's a round, puffy mushroom as opposed to a flat saucer-like mushroom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my dots here to create a profile or a contour, an outline of the cap. Okay, and you see these little white spots around the cap as well. We had mentioned that maybe it was tree sap that kind of has that sort of ashy look on the top. But there are these other spots that occur on these mushrooms. And I don't know how true this is, but there is a toxin, a toxic sap that is released when this fungus blossoms and bursts forth from its casing, revealing that upper half. Okay, now this upper half, and you can see I just created a sort of stencil using my dots here. This upper half will have um, these spots of that toxic sap, I guess if you want to call it that. And two things that I found that are kind of interesting about that. Number one, apparently it gets flies drunk and they will fly around in all crazy directions and even crash into things. So that's one piece of mushroom lore about this specific species that remains to be fact checked. And then the second one, if you're interested in Viking history, apparently this mushroom has hallucinogenic properties and it removes fear. So if you've ever heard of the term berserk, the Vikings, and again, we have to fact check this, would ingest a mushroom, a fungus, with those chemical properties and would be fearless in battle. Okay, they would be called berserkers. Now, that type of fungus, if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart, there is a chemical component in this blue stuff, this woad, they call it, that also has a similar effect, right? You remember William Wallace wearing that blue face paint running towards the English? Yeah, that kind of courage, I guess, is chemically induced sometimes. So what I'm doing here right now is I've connected my dots, not literally, as you can see, I've done some active editing here. And what I mean by active editing is this is mostly guesswork when you're sizing up your proportions, right? See how it's slightly inside these two dots, both horizontally and vertically? Okay, it's not perfectly touching those points. And that's because as I was beginning to do my planning of my drawing, I realized that it was essentially shorter than I anticipated, and I made that edit while I was actively drawing. So active editing. Second thing I'm doing here is I'm playing with line weight variation, and that just means whenever I'm seeing a shadow, whenever I'm seeing a part of the specimen that is covered and sort of obscured, I'm going to make the lines thicker than I would in an area that is out in the open, like on top. So the underside of your mushroom should be just a little bit thicker, just like this, the line I'm talking about, just like that. And the top will be less dark. And that way, you're going to create the illusion of a shadow without doing any shading, right? It helps to show a little bit more dimension. It also brings a level of maturity to your line work. I think it's a really easy thing to do in order to bring your drawing to the next level. All you're doing is you're looking for where that shadow is, and then you're making that line a little bit darker, and you're leaving the other lines alone. So now that we have this started, I'm going to go ahead and fill in a little bit around here. I've noticed also how this ground is disturbed, as if this mushroom abruptly burst forth from the earth. And believe it or not, they do grow quite fast. If you've ever seen a time lapse video of a fungus blossoming forth from the ground, I mean, the organism itself is primarily underground, right? It only comes up to basically spread spores. Okay. And it's actually kind of an interesting thing that some mushrooms are edible. Most of them, like 99.9% of mushrooms, don't need to be eaten. They don't want to be eaten, right? The whole idea of eating a fruit is so that we ingest the seeds and spread the seeds and provide fertilization, or fertilizer rather, for those seeds to grow. Okay, so I'm just making right now. I'm focusing on the sap that's on top of the mushroom here. I'm also looking at these little indentations, and I'm going to be using very light lines following the contours of that shape. So anyway, the idea of using the idea of a mushroom being underground most of the time is pretty fascinating. And then there was a study that was done, I believe out in California, that showed an organism, a fungus organism that stretched for several hundred miles. And I thought that was really neat. So things that I want to point out in this drawing, I'm also going to go ahead and draw this root here, okay, because it is nicely nestled next to this root. And the reason why that's important is because I want to help identify what this tree is by looking at either the bark or what's on the bark. I had mentioned lichen, I had mentioned sap. So most likely we're looking at something in the pine family. Or if you look closely at the needles, okay, more specifically, look at this clue. Pines have long, thin needles. These are short, stubby needles. So chances are we're probably underneath a spruce tree. Look how these flat these this foliage is flat and short. Okay, it's not rounded like a fir tree. Short and flat, which would indicate possibly even a yew, Y-E-W, or possibly a spruce, something along those lines. So I'm going to go ahead and um, I'm going to draw some of these little needles that I'm seeing on the ground here too. Okay, this foliage, flat blades, little X's, they're all laying on top of each other, covering each other. So now that I've done a little bit of detective work, right? You can go ahead and I'm just going to shade very haphazardly with my lines here because I have more stuff to say. And since it's more about the detective work here and less about the rendering, I'm not too concerned about making it look perfect. But the idea here is, okay, we have some interesting things happening. We have some lore, we have some background on the fungus. We know that it starts underground and bursts forth. You can see all the energy here in the soil. It looks disturbed. It looks like it happened very quickly rather than gradually, right? So the idea here is, what detective work can we do? Well, first we can identify the organism, the specimen. So this is a yellow orange fly agaric mushroom, but we can just go ahead with the Latin name, and that's Amanita. Amanita muscaria. And the variety is Formosa. Okay, because there are a lot of different varieties within this species. Okay, so just using a little bit of line work to accentuate the roundness of this specimen. Again, it's a puff ball. We want it to look puffy. We don't want it to feel flat. Okay. So some clues, right? We can begin by taking baseline measurements. Okay, we have our date. We have our specimen name, a good location. If, for example, we know where spruce grows, let's say, for example, we're over in, give me a national park. Somebody give me a national park where there's a lot of spruce trees. Doesn't have to be in the US. Okay, we can do maybe Yosemite, or how about Northern Cascades, right? Let's say, for example, we're at Mount Rainier. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my location. Mount Rainier National Park. And then let's just say we're on the Wonderland Trail. Okay, so some of these clues, what are these? We can talk about this foliage here. Let's go ahead and say, we'll put a good guess and say spruce. Probably black spruce. What else do we have? We have what looks like a lot of moss up here. Okay, so that indicates the green moss. Okay, we could possibly be on north side of a tree. Now there's that old thing, oh, moss only grows on the north side of the tree. That's not true. Moss grows on either side of the tree, but it's the coloration of the moss that tells you what direction or what side of the tree it's on. And it's all a reaction to sunlight, really. If the moss tends to be yellowish, pale, kind of dried out looking, it's more exposed to sun. If you're in the northern hemisphere, that's probably in a southerly direction. Again, it's all based on sun exposure, so you have to look in a few different places in order to verify. Um, but this could be on the north side of a tree because we're also seeing some lichen that is a darker color, like a grayish color. So I'm going to say that this is sap, and that's a root. And we have a red cap. Okay. And if you don't know what those spots are, let's say, for example, we don't know, these spots are dried juice, dried mushroom juice. Let's just say dried spots. Okay. So we have a nice little overview of the environment in which not only we have our subject, which is the mushroom, right? So we name that here. We also have the time of season that we found it, and also the location. Now, the parts of the location that are interesting are the foliage that we found, the fact that we're looking at lush green. Um, let's go ahead and say green moss. There's a rock over here that has lichen growing on it. So moss and lichens can also tell us a little bit more about the direction of in which we're looking. You know, the amount of sunlight that we get and how certain species of moss and lichen react. So we have lichen, Lichen. Okay. So continue on your drawing, and I'm going to go ahead and continue this lecture while you draw. If you want to do some shading, that's totally fine. I want to talk to you about developing your practice more, right? We spoke a little bit at the beginning of the class of using the experience you've gained over the past year of drawing in order to really hone in on things that excite you, so that you'll be in not only a better position to learn, but you'll also be in a better position to teach. So we'll talk a little bit about identifying your personal area of interest. So really the whole logic behind this is that it should give you something that is consistently inspiring. It should be something you're thinking about even when you're, doing the dishes or something. It's something that should come up on your mind simply because you enjoy it. And if you find yourself drifting towards a specific subject, that's great. If that's plants or insects, if you're into entomology or if you're into tropical fish, great. Think about what the history of that subject is next, right? Because you have your own curiosity, and that's very unique to you. And if you can learn about other people's curiosity about the same subject, that could help open up your mind to that subject in a different way and provide a new perspective that can make it even more exciting. And if you think about it, how does that interest that you have evolve not only with these new perspectives, but how do they evolve in nature? How do they evolve with the seasons? And how does that area of interest of yours overlap onto other fascinating subjects? I brought up tropical fish before. Well, maybe that brings you into coral reefs. And maybe if coral reefs are interesting, you might get into single-celled anemones that live within those coral reefs. And it can go down a rabbit hole, so to speak. And if, for example, you're finding yourself bursting with excitement, can't wait to share it with somebody, it's really great to have a friend or family member with a similar interest to help express that, because bottling up that excitement isn't as much fun as it is than sharing that with other people, right? So we always talk about how we can prepare ourselves when we select our area of interest, and we go out into the world in search of knowledge within that AOI. So we always talk a little bit about what we bring with us. I always advocate for bare minimum stuff: notebook, pencil, pen, check. Super done, doesn't break the bank. You don't have to worry about other things. Now, if, for example, you know what you're going to use, and if you have the intention and the focus in mind, bring extra things, bring the things that you need. Those are those optional materials, or those modularized materials that you can use to expand your baseline kit of your book, pencil, and pen. Okay, and that could be scientific equipment, measuring equipment, color pencils, paints, you name it. That's all stuff that you should be bringing with you out whenever you're heading out in pursuit of knowledge. And in terms of bringing it all together, you should focus maybe on a place that is more local for you. You know, I always fantasize about being in the middle of a jungle or on the top of a mountain. But the fact is, I'm a New York City guy. So I got to make do with what I have. And that's typically Prospect Park in Brooklyn, or maybe Central Park in Manhattan. If I get out and I'm guiding, that means I get up into the Catskills or the Hudson Valley. I'm a happy guy. So choose a nature location that's suitable for your area of interest and try to spend a lot of time there, and make a hobby out of the research. Record and compare your observations over time. And one really awesome fact is that you don't need to go to the ends of the earth to discover something interesting or important, right? The concept of genetics. Gregor Mendel, remember, he had the gardens with the peas. He he was able to pave the road for for genetic science in his own garden. That's the kind of power that your intention and focus could muster. And it's just by listening, it's just by focusing on nature. And I had mentioned earlier the idea of a mentor. It's great to have a mentor. I have a mentor, and he teaches me all about trees and dendrology, and it's such a cool thing. Um, so, if you can, in your own community, maybe find somebody that knows a little bit more about botanical specimens than you do, or than reptiles or amphibians or so on and so forth. Go to some lectures. You know, we're starting to open up a little bit from the COVID grip. So be safe, but it's great to attend events and to listen and learn. And you know what? It also helps you to become a mentor to somebody else. And that's really, again, where I want everyone's heads to be at this Earth Day: is how can your practice pave the way for somebody else's creativity as well? All right. Also, last thing I want to talk about is just the ethics of research. Really, do no harm. That's basically what our motto is. We want to know the laws of the land. And if we need a permit or a license to go to a certain location, you got to do that. There's the idea of leaving no trace. Basically, keep your garbage where it belongs. And in fact, leave the place better than you found it. It's good stewardship to pick up garbage if you find it. Um, Always be careful about working with endangered species. You know, you don't want to disturb a fragile something that's fragile and hanging in the balance. You don't want to take more than your studies require either if you're collecting things like botanical specimens. And if you are keeping a living specimen, I know some people who have butterfly larvae, or people who rescue baby birds after they fall out of a nest. Keep your living specimens happy and healthy, and then bring them back to their proper place. And don't collect for commercial gain. All right. So now that that's done, we can begin our field exercises. We have several field exercises today, and I'm going to go ahead and talk us through speed sketching. If you've been in a nature journaling class before, you know what speed sketching is all about. And you're going to adopt the attitude of a natural history reporter. Your objective is to cram as many facts as possible into a small 2 by 2 inch square or rectangle on your page. And here is a little template I prepared. This is something you could print out, or it's something you can just sketch by hand in your own nature journal. But it includes places to add your baseline data, and it helps to give you a sort of starting point for when you get out there. So here is a little example of something from my last nature journaling class. Yeah, it doesn't look super pretty, right? But it's filled with facts, it's filled with information. And some people like to have a field journal where they can do this type of drawing. And then they like to have an at home journal where they can sit and really render and make beautiful illustrations and then reinforce those beautiful illustrations with the facts from their field book. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you again. We're going to do a 30-second sketch here. And just in case you're joining us, this is our second exercise. So prepare your page. And what I'd like you to do is start by just drawing a margin or a rectangle. Okay. I had the this image up here before. Basically, if you can just draw this, it's a rectangle with a crosshairs. You have one vertical line dividing two halves and a horizontal line. So that's going to be a quadrant here. All right. So in the first quadrant, the upper left-hand corner, all right, we're going to go ahead and do our next sketch. And I'm just using the other side of my paper. Again, I don't want to waste. So I'll add the date. Today's Earth Day, April 22nd. Okay. And let's say, for example, we're going for a walk in the woods somewhere. Let's use our imaginations. Maybe we're in northern Russia, we're in Siberia or something like that. So just for fun, we'll use our imagination. So I put the location. So you have your two pieces of baseline data, your date and your location. The next thing we're going to do is we'll worry about things like environmental conditions in a bit. So I have a 30-second sketch for you. I have my little kitchen timer here. And I want you to pick up your pencil and I want you to focus on getting the details down in text first and then move on to sketching. Okay, so you have only 30 seconds and we'll begin in 3, 2, 1, go. I want to know everything that you're seeing right now. Okay, this looks like beautiful purple crocuses. So I'm literally writing purple crocus patch in the sun. That's important. Some flowers require direct sunlight. Okay, now that I have a little bit of time, I can do a little bit of sketch. Okay, boom, and that's it. Time's up. That's all you had time for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my box with you just in case you're wondering what the heck, James, this was no time at all. So the idea is you don't have all the time in the world. Okay, so what I have here, it's almost like you're on a scavenger hunt and you're collecting items as you go. But instead of plucking the flower, you're writing down purple crocus patch in the sun, and you have one little sketch there. Okay, this took 30 seconds. Not a problem. If you're hiking along with the group, you can stop for 30 seconds, do a little doodle, catch right up with them. Nobody had to stop. Now let's move on to the next one. Except this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a full minute, a full 60 seconds here to get as much information down into this square as possible. And what we're doing is we're constructing a narrative. We're not just trying to build a random assortment of images, but these all come together under the same umbrella, the same baseline data as we had before. We have the date, we have the location. Now, what do we find there? Okay, so 60 seconds is on the timer. We'll begin this next sketch. Again, start with the text first. In 3, 2, 1, begin. Awesome. So first thing I'm going to do is 2 monarch butterflies. I don't know what the species of flower is. On purple flower clusters. Fluorescens, they're called. The cluster of flowers is called a fluorescens. So we all know what a monarch butterfly looks like, so we don't have to spend too much time trying to draw them. But these flowers are actually the thing that's more interesting to me because I don't know what those are. So I'm going to look and I'm going to take a look and I'm going to say, okay, we have an opposite arrangement. We have a what looks like a herbaceous I was going to say herbaceous perennial. Okay, I ran out of time. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen with you again here. So as you can see, 30 extra seconds. Okay, we have more, we have filled our entire rectangle. Where we had space before, we now no longer have space. So imagine what you're going to be able to do when I give you an additional 30 seconds for this next one here. Okay, so minute and 30 on the timer. Okay, going to share my screen with you again. 90 seconds. We'll begin in 3, 2, 1, go. Ooh. Okay, so we did a class on birds in flight at the beginning of the month, and it was awesome because we got to learn a lot about the mechanics of flight. We got to learn about bird anatomy. We got to learn about the composition of different types of feathers and their purpose. And we also just had a really good time drawing a snowy egret, which are kind of like the aristocrats of the egret family. They have that wild wig on the top. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing here is I'm trying to sketch a bird that's in theory flying overhead. That's wrong. What I should write is owl, brown, spotted, flying where? So flying to, let's just say, a tree. And I'm looking to see if there's anything in its clutches. You know, sometimes you see an osprey flying overhead and there's a fish. You know, sometimes you see an owl flying and there's a rat or a mole or something. You know, I'm seeing a flat face. Just to guesstimate the width, I'd say about 5 feet wide. And that's it, I'm out of time. But with that time that I had, I was able to fill my rectangle. Okay? It's not about, yeah, I know it looks crazy. It's not about having it be a perfectly rendered owl, right? But I wanted to get the wingspan. I wanted to get the flat face, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the texture. And I wanted to know where it was going. So I watched it, I wrote down its actions, and then from memory, I sketched it kind of. You know, that's I guess the narrative we can have if we translated this into a field setting rather than a studio setting. All right, so now our final rectangle is going to be a whole 2 minutes. Okay, I want this square crammed with information. There should be no blank space left by the time we're done with that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you again. Boom, 120 seconds. We're going to begin. 2 minutes on the clock in 3, 2, 1, go. Awesome. So we have a red fox taking a drink from this little stream. He's looking at his reflection. He's thinking, man, does my hair really look like that? No. But it's in cover, right? So we see little white flowers around it. Okay. Maybe that's a yarrow or something. I don't know what this species is. But we have this red fox. They like to hang out alone. So I'm not expecting to see another one. They don't really have packs like coyotes or wolves. Even coyotes kind of go alone most of the time. Okay, yeah, white flowers. I'm going to say fluorescence because they also look clustered. yarrow, maybe. We have some tall grass here. That's growing in the water. Okay, that's not wild rice, but sometimes, you know, if you're seeing plants growing directly out of the water that's tall and spindly like that, could be wild rice. Not that though. That's grass. That's a grass. What else are we seeing here? Maybe there's what lives in this stream. Is he looking for crawfish or is he looking for frogs? Maybe he's not just going for a drink. What kind of insect life? Do we see skimmers, skimmer beetles? Just want to finish my thought. Okay. Okay. So looking at our collection of sketches, you'll notice that the image quality is pretty much the same, right? Not too much there. But the questions, the thought, the flow of information from my head to the page is definitely denser here than it is anywhere else. Because I have more time to question, I have more time to observe. And that's the idea of being a natural history reporter. Okay. So now to tie all of this information together, we have our location, we have our date. Now we have to have our environmental conditions. And that's basically what's the weather doing? What's the environment look like? So we have a windy day, windy and cloudy day. Let's say temperatures in and we're going to use Fahrenheit. So temperatures in 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's like what, 10 degrees Celsius? It's 0 degrees Celsius is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And just add 10. Is that how that works? I don't know. So that's our field report for this little hike that we just went on. So we constructed a narrative a little bit at a time, and each of these sketches took less than 5 minutes each. This was 30 seconds, a minute and 30, 2 seconds. So yeah, it's an intense focus of your intention, and it's something that we kind of touched on last night when we did our gesture drawing. It was more intense last night though. For anybody who was there, they'll tell you that. All right, so let's go ahead and move quickly into our next exercise. So we do a botanical drawing workshop, but I want to tell you about another fun exercise you can do in your nature journal that involves drawing plants, and it's a plant timeline. Right now, you can consider spring the beginning or the birth time of different types of plants, because we're looking at buds opening up and new foliage coming out. We're looking at flowers blossoming. And now as I brought out my specimen earlier, we're also seeing pollination occurring, right? So what we can do is start this exercise in the spring, continue it in the summer and the fall, and then end it in the winter. So this is something that you will come back to. So if you're doing this in your nature journal, have at least a spread dedicated to this specific plant, and maybe create a color key to help show the difference of color palette that you're seeing, because you'll be surprised how plants will shift from their verdant spring and summer color palette to their either vibrant or dull fall color palette, and then maybe to their totally bland and blah winter palette. So this is the idea. You know, I have this also for you to download, but you can also just sketch it at your leisure. And I'm going to open up to the full size of this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper here. And I'm going to create a margin and basically just copy down what I'm seeing here on the page. So we have the beginning, the middle, and the end. Classic narrative format. Okay, and I'm seeing a lot of beautiful laurels, mountain laurels blossoming right now. So we did that in the botanical drawing workshop in February, but I wanted to revisit it just because I'm seeing it and it's relevant right now in the New York landscape. So actually, this is the purple coneflower that we did last September. But you know, this is the kind of idea where you have the budding stage, the post budding stage, you have the floral stage, and then you have the stasis, the dormant stage. So that's kind of like the gist of this exercise, to look like this. So our subject isn't the purple coneflower, though. That's at the end of the month for our botanical drawing workshop. Today we're going to look at the mountain laurel, or the Calmia latifolia. And so many people uh, mispronounce that, so I don't feel too bad. But okay, so again, we're going to have our baseline data starting off with the date. Today's the 22nd, not 2001, 2021. And the subject is the mountain laurel. Okay, so if you've studied this specific type of plant before, if you were in that last botanical drawing workshop, think about this exercise as a way for you to teach other people what you've learned about this plant through your drawing. So that's the conversation you're having. You're putting your knowledge on the paper and sharing that with somebody. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this reference photo into the chat. I'm going to switch over to my top-down camera so that you can have the reference photo larger and open in a different window, and you can see my drawing at its full size. Okay, so that's going in the chat right now. It's also something I emailed to you, and it's on the Eventbrite page. Okay, so first things first, let's start with the spring, right? And we'll put the date, sorry, we'll put the date here. Okay, instead of in the upper right-hand corner, because this is going to take time. This is a drawing project that could last an entire year. Okay. So this is the beginning. So we have a cluster of flowers here. So the space in which this cluster is going to occupy, I'll go ahead and draw a little diamond here. So this is about as high as it's going to go. This is about as low as it's going to go. And this is about as wide as it's going to get. So this cluster is going to fit within this diamond here. All right. And we have a way to sort of begin this by creating an outline of the cluster as a whole. I'm not focused on individual units or buds, flowers yet. I'm focused on the organization of the entire whole cluster. And that's going to help me break it down into smaller, more digestible pieces in just a little bit. But just look at the beautiful cups and star shapes that this type of flower forms in. It's kind of a remarkable, I don't know, like a decahedron shape. I'm trying to count the amount of sides as I'm doing this and talking, but it's kind of tricky. Um, they almost look like when you put a little floret on a cake with icing. That's what comes to mind. Okay, and that's a really special thing to see in nature. You know, it's not your typical, um, daisy or posy or crocus. It's something that has an entirely different form to it, and it's a beautiful sight to see in the springtime if you're ever hiking through a little area of growth where you're seeing the mountain laurel. They typically like to reside in upland slopes and mixed forest regions in dry to moist soils. So you'd have to look for them there. All right. So now that I have the kind of cluster here figured, I'm going to start pulling out individual units. I want to emphasize what a closed bud looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle or a call out. Okay, it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Okay, and this is going to help me teach the viewer what I know about this particular state of growth, stage rather, stage of growth. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just roughly make some directional indicators here as to what these little fins are. Okay. And it's got like a little pinkish hue towards the tip. That's beautiful too. Now that I'm thinking about flowers and cake, I wonder what the difference between frosting and icing is. Okay. Irrelevant. Okay. So this is a closed flower. Okay. And you could also use a little arrow to call out something specific, like pink tip, white petals. Okay. And I can just let that text sit over the little flower here. Okay. And it can kind of have that nice diagrammy feel to it. And you don't have to draw every single flower here. You can focus on one or two things that give you the general gist of it, um, given our time constraint and all. Okay. And we'll focus more on the flowers here than we will on the foliage, even though it's equally as important. But we can focus on the foliage more in the next panel that we'll have. Okay, you can draw a little division line here. And I kind of like to let things overlap into areas where maybe, for example, this is the winter section in the middle. I'll let the flowers kind of come in there. It's like they're in front of, so it also helps to establish that this is first, closer to the camera. We were talking about visual hierarchy in our nature drawing intro workshop. And essentially what visual hierarchy is, um, it's a way to focus the camera, so to speak, on a main subject, right? So you're creating a visual hierarchy by putting more time and attention into what the subject of your drawing is. Okay, so in terms of visual hierarchy, we'll make sure that these flowers have a position at the top of that pyramid. And then everything else behind it kind of blurs out. Okay, so we have both male and female parts of this flower. Okay, you're seeing this little section out in the middle, and then you're also seeing these little reddish clusters. Okay, so that means that this is and if you remember the term, dioecious species, meaning that it has both male and female reproductive organs. Dioecious meaning one house, two houses. No, monoecious. Monoecious means one house, which means one set of reproductive organs. Dioecious means two house. Or am I reversing that? Either way, this particular species has two, male and female. And you can usually tell the male because they have pollen clusters. Okay, similar to this pin oak, we have these catkins, right? So that means this is where the green pollen comes from. It's blown by the wind. And then these little receptacles, these little flowers are the female flowers. Okay, so two flowers, two different sets of reproductive organs on the same species. Okay, So it can take a long time to get all of these sketched in. So we can just do a few. We can just do a couple, and have some call outs. Like for example, we have male and female. Structures, reproductive structures. I also want to talk about this. It's cup shaped. Okay, and fragrant. If it smells good, we call it fragrant. If it smells bad, we say malodorous. We have a few species of malodorous plants coming up right now. Actually, this one I saw this one starting to grow in February. The skunk cabbage, which is a swamp time favorite. That's a good one. They can grow earlier than other springtime plants because they generate their own heat. They can melt the snow around them in order to poke up and begin, um, get a little head start, so to speak, and take advantage of that sunlight. So they stink, and you know what? They're not pollinated um, by well, I guess they could be pollinated by bees, but they're more so pollinated by flies. And there's a flower, I think it's a tropical flower. It's called the corpse fly, and I bet you can guess what that smells like. But it smells that way so that it can attract its pollinators, which are flies. Now, if they had a chicken parmesan flower, that one, I'd be on top of that one all day. Oh, hey, Connor. Thanks for coming, bud. I saw somebody trying to sign in with a hike and draw account, and I'm like, wait, that's me. Must be getting, we must be getting hacked.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I was like, oh, we're being hacked. Somebody has. Oh, geez. No, I'm happy you came, man. Thank you.
Yes, good class.
Thank you
Talk
so
soon.
much. Awesome. So Connor is a great illustrator. He has a wonderful imagination. He and I went to school together, and Connor professionally illustrates um, graphic novels, games, books, and even wine labels, beer and wine labels, show posters, stuff like that. So since he has such a great imagination, and he has a great background in fantasy and sci-fi, we kind of take an alternate route, and we combine nature drawing with fantasy and sci-fi. And the last class that Connor did was how to draw tree folk. So creating a sort of anthropomorphizing trees. And it was a really fun class to sit in on and to participate in. So if you ever want to just kind of deviate from the norm and stretch the limits of your creativity, I definitely recommend signing up for one of Connor's classes. All right, so we got a pretty good idea of what these clusters look like here. Okay, and I want to make sure we have enough time for the last exercise. So feel free to continue filling the rest of your clusters in at your own leisure. Now let's say we're going to go into fall or autumn. So let's say it's October 12th. And now these beautiful flowers have been fertilized, and now we're seeing the fruit reach its maturity. So what I'm going to suggest is, again, you can focus on all of them, but I think focusing on the cluster as a whole first gives you the let's say the right proportions to work with. In that way, you're able to have a more accurate representation of what you're seeing. Um, than trying to do it piecemeal one at a time and then being like, oh, shoot, I made them too small or too big. Just kind of keeps everything on the same page. So I create a little outline using my dot system here. And I'm also keeping my eye on the foliage as well. I want to keep this looking as true to the picture as possible, since this is in fact a scientific drawing that we're doing. Okay, again, we have a wonderful botanical drawing workshop once a month, and we really dive into the science behind the plants. So keep that in mind if you're free at the end of the month, if you want to try that out. Oh, I love drawing leaves that have character. Look at that. It looks like a little chunk got bitten out of it by some kind of a insect. Okay, we're seeing a nice and just write down the notes as you make these observations. We're seeing a deep green with it has like a sort of waxy sheen to it. And the underside of the leaf has more of like a yellow green color. So you can write that down. Draw little arrows to help to illustrate your points there. Okay. So again, it's kind of cool to let these things overlap, even the text. Where did you find this specimen? Right, that's another thing. Those environmental condition notes. Like if you find yourself with blank space, fill it up. Where did you find these plants? How many of them are there like it? What plants are its neighbors? You know, it's kind of interesting. I learned a little fact about the beech tree, and that fact is that beech trees really like company. So it's very rare you'll find a solitary beech. You know, you'll find a solitary oak, and you know, maybe even a solitary holly. But beech trees like company, so they'll usually grow amongst birches or ash trees, things like that. Actually, maybe not ash trees, more like maybe willow trees. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at not only the individual tree, because yeah, it's great that you can teach people about individual species, but think about the bigger picture. Like, what is this species' role in its, let's call it its ecological neighborhood or its nature community, right? And what are its neighbors doing? That's one of the things I really enjoy about going on hikes with my mentor is that he talks about things in the bigger picture, and it makes the whole hike interesting because we're not just worried about trying to find a specific species. It's, well, what are we looking at in terms of an environmental perspective, and um, how is this tying into what we're looking for? And based on those observations, you'll actually be able to find what you're looking for a lot easier because you'll understand where it lives in the neighborhood. So again, mountain laurel specifically likes dry to moist soils in upland slopes and mixed forest areas, undergrowth. So it's okay with shade, shade tolerant, let's call it. So I want to do a big drawing here. So I'm going to make a large circle and kind of cover up this cluster a little bit because I want to do a zoom in drawing of the fruit. So the fruit itself is kind of berry shaped. Okay, and that's something you can write down. Berry shaped on a slender stalk. And it has this sort of proboscis. But if you think about it, this is coming from this part of the flower right here. If you look down the middle of the flower, you'll see this. It's like a little green pea with a antenna. Okay. Right. So you can continue drawing this at your own leisure. We're just going to move on to the next and final part. Let's say that this is the winter. This is December 29th, last day of 2021. Now what we're seeing is the result of the fruit um, in its dormant state, but these are like pods that kind of burst forth and release the seeds. Now I'm drawing a little circle with a what looks like a star. Okay, so and you're also seeing the remnant of these little leaflets here, cradling the underside. So what has changed the most dramatically? Well, the color, for example, went from a lush green to like a reddish brown. So and also the texture too, dry and brown. And we have each of these little sections contains a number of seeds. So let's just call this a seed pod. And that'll be our vernacular for it. Okay, and it'll grow in a group here. Okay, because these were all once flowers. Okay, and again, you can spend as much time on this as you want at your own leisure. We only have about 15 minutes next, so I'd like to move and progress to the next exercise. Okay. And that way we'll have some time for uh, closing, about sharing your work and all that kind of stuff too. That's important. I definitely want to touch on that. Okay, so that's this exercise. I'm going to grab another piece of paper. Okay. So just to recap what we've done so far, we have our nature object drawing, but we're also observing and absorbing the information of the environment which that object occupies. It's not just a drawing of a red cap fungus, it's a lot more. We also have our speed sketching exercise, right? We're putting as much information as we can, cramming it into these little boxes, right? So that's us thinking like a natural history reporter. And we're kind of translating that over into this exercise too, because we're filling our observations, our prolonged meditation on the different stages, growth stages of this plant, and injecting them with data points and notes. So we're growing. We're really putting our brain to work here. So for the next and final exercise, I'm going to go ahead and share my slideshow with you again. Grab a fresh piece of paper or just flip your page over if you still have room. And I'm going to teach you about surveying a landscape. This is an exercise we've done in the past, so this is not a new thing. But there are some things I've learned since I started teaching this, and I think it's really good to revisit areas that that we feel like we can continue to grow in. So this is a little template that I've created. I've updated some of the text here, so you can feel free to copy this template down. And I'm going to go ahead and fold my page in half so I can use this other part of the page for a future endeavor. And I'm going to start by squaring off my page here. Okay, and we're dividing it into layers. We have a top layer, which is like a canopy of a forest or maybe a mountain peak. We have a middle layer, and then we have a ground floor, right? So just to give you a context here, we're looking at a scene in what looks like the Everglades. We have a bayou, and starting at the top, we're looking not at just the tops of the trees. Here's the new knowledge I picked up over the past few months. Start with the sky. What is the sky telling you? Okay. I mentioned environmental conditions before. That includes the weather. So what we're seeing isn't a perfectly blue sky. We're seeing what looks like cumulonimbus and cumulus clouds moving through. Okay, and what can these clouds tell us about the day we're about to have? Okay, so these beautiful florets on top of the clouds, that's all the moisture gathering there. Now, when it comes to cumulonimbus, you want to always keep your eyes on them because those are what we consider to be our rain clouds. The weather begins to deteriorate when the big puffy top of the cloud starts to fall and ice begins to form, and then that begins to flatten the top like a pancake, and it begins to floret out the bottom. That's a great sign that it's about to rain. Okay, if you're seeing these clouds from a distance, they have that flat anvil bottom and they're kind of fluffy on top. Okay, that's going to tell us maybe, all right, we'll keep our eye on them, but they should be fine. So that's the first thing. If you want, you can go ahead and begin by just considering in your notes the way that the clouds are going to form. And I even packed this up for you as well. So in case you're wondering, this can be a little homework exercise for you to do on your own over here. Okay. So for class, let's continue. So we have our top layer, which is the sky. So we're starting to see, and I'll go ahead and let's see if I can share both of these at the same time. Actually, if you can, drag that little thumbnail of my window out and try to make it a little bit bigger because I do want you to see these questions too. So all I'm going to do is just draw a line down the center of my page, and I'm going to use text on the right hand side. So I'm going to say cumulonimbus. Don't worry about the spelling. Clouds. And I'm going to write in parentheses non-threatening. And cumulus. Cumulus. Clouds. Those are like the little sheep, little cotton balls floating through the air. Those are fine. Now, the rest of the sky, what we're seeing is a white glow to the horizon. Okay, that's an indication of particles in the air, moisture particles or carbon particles. Now, depending upon the humidity of the day, you're going to see a white corona around the sun. You're also going to see that white horizon too. So there's a lot of moisture in the air. Okay, so that's another thing we can consider. Now, as we begin to get to the tops of the trees, here's where we pick off from where we were last time, right? So I'm just going to vaguely draw a tree line over here. I'm going to write canopy. Okay. I start trying to look for birds. What kind of bird species are up there? I'm also going to look for things like lightning strikes. What kind of weather came through here recently? Am I in a good spot in case this turns into a thunderstorm? That's another thing. So, lightning. You can also see bird species. Right now is primo bird watching weather because it's not too cold, it's clear, and the foliage hasn't come out all the way on the trees. So things that live on the top of the trees, things like wrens, okay, things like we're seeing like little creepers or nuthatches. Woodpeckers, although they'll also be depending on the species, they'll be in the middle and also on the ground as well. I know the pileated woodpeckers like to go on the ground. Okay, so that's and also foliage. What's the foliage telling us? Okay, now that we're kind of in the mid layer, okay, we have that little horizon line in the distance. Okay, we're looking at tall grass, and you don't have to draw it perfectly. Just get the idea of grass. And I kind of like use that analogy of the Richter scale, right? You're making like a little heart rate monitor line. That's supposed to be the grass. Okay. And I'll share this with you at the end. What's more important is the observations you're making. It's a survey, right? So you want that text to be really where your head's at. So for that mid layer, this is just between where the trunk of the tree is and the top of the grass. So you're going to also look for things like animal habitats. Sometimes if there's a lot of woodpeckers, you'll see like this rivet kind of pattern going vertically, going horizontally across the bark. Animal habitats, you're looking for maybe tree disease. You're going to look for things like other species of birds. And so on. Now, when you get down to the ground level, right, you're going to start noticing other types of clues, especially if you're in a water environment like this, right? Because you're not only just stopping at the surface of the water, there's an entire kingdom of life happening underneath the surface of the water. So the ground layer is different in a forest area than it would be in a water area. But even then, you have like chipmunk burrows, ant colonies, things like that. Okay. So the ground level, we have tall grasses, which usually means what? Means great areas for nests, for waterfowl, dragonflies. Yeah, snakes, skeeters. Well, the mosquitoes, they don't really care so much about the grass as they do about they want stagnant water or mud puddles, things like that. So that's where we keep our head at. Now, when we go below the surface to the water, we're also going to consider fish and amphibians, right? Um, and then also things like conditions of the water. Is it potable? Is it saline? Is it brackish? Is it fresh? You know, things like that. So composition. So similar to the exercise that we did with our, here we go. Similar to the exercise that we did with our boxes, right? We're not so much concerned with the quality of the sketch as we are with the amount of data that we're taking home with us. Because you can always bring a camera and snap a photo for reference, do a little sketch on the spot, fill this with data, then go home and using your reference photo, create a very refined drawing with all of this information in mind, okay? So we only have about 5 minutes left. So I apologize if that last exercise felt like a rush. But again, we started up with the clouds and looking at the weather, monitoring the system that's moving through, the way the wind is blowing. That's important. Wind direction. Looking at the canopy of the trees, looking for things like birds, specific species, maybe some nests, foliage, also lightning strikes. Okay, if you have to bail out, that's another thing you need to know. Um, then when we get to the middle, the trunk area, we're looking at animal habitats. We're looking for things like disease, moss, lichen, that can help us tell direction. Um, we're also looking for different species of birds. And then when we get to this ground layer here, right, we have our tall grass, what lives in tall grass, and we have the water, what lives in the water, and so on. Okay, so that's that exercise. It's important to know how to survey a landscape because that's going to be how you begin each and every one of your nature journal entries. Doesn't matter what exercise you're starting, right? It's not like I'm going to be there and say, "Hey, draw this, hey, draw that." That's kind of the area where you become that you transform from the student into the mentor, and you begin picking out things in the bigger picture to point out to the other people that you're with, either physically with them or through your artwork. So that kind of segues us very nicely into this. So we have I have a few pointers to you in terms of sharing your discoveries. Like I said, teaching others. The point of learning isn't just to help you understand your area of interest for your own reasons, but it's a great opportunity to become like a subject matter expert on that particular topic and help bring other people's awareness to your level and possibly beyond. Right? Every time you read a book, you're observing somebody else's experience, and that experience could last decades. Right? I'm reading books by Alexander von Humboldt that were written over the course of 30 plus years in the 1800s, and now I'm compounding that with reading Sagan, and now I'm compacting that with reading Tyson, and it's just like you're bringing hundreds of years of history into your perspective, and now you're transferring that through your own direct observations, through your artwork to friends and family members as well. So think about that and consider becoming a mentor to another budding artist or nature lover, and think about how maybe that can influence your practice. Um, there's a lot of ways. I love this picture of the squirrel. There's a lot of ways you can get involved on a local community level, right? I've been partnering with a library lately, and a trail conference. I do things with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference and the Dedham Public Library. There are other ways to get involved too. I also am a volunteer scout, assistant scout leader for a Boy Scout troop. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I was involved in Scouts for many, many years. So I try to give back in that regard. And I think that a little bit of leadership in the outdoor community, speaking of environmental stewardship and Earth Day, is really important because the more people are getting stir crazy from this whole pandemic, we're seeing a lot of things like masks and gloves on the trail. We're seeing a lot more foot traffic in our parks than we usually do. And it's not like we want to keep people out and shame them. We just want to help be good examples for them. And think about it in terms of, if this was your house, how would you treat it, right? One of the things that I have been trying to get better at is displaying my work, and I encourage you to do that as well. Think about how you can display your best work. Take pride in the fact that not everybody takes the initiative to do this, and even if you are a little self-conscious about what your drawings look like, chances are if you share your nature journal with somebody, they're going to be totally thrilled and impressed. And it's kind of bringing it to another level when you start to hang your work up on the wall or put it in a picture frame. I've contacted local small businesses who have wall space and said, hey, I have some work that I'd like to display to the public. Are you interested in hanging it? And I have a couple of pieces in some retail stores in New York City that are hanging up. um, I haven't participated in a gallery event in some time, but that's something maybe you should consider. If you have a local fair or you have a craft show, show off your work because it's awesome. Also, gift your work to people. I haven't bought a greeting card in years, and it just helps your loved ones to feel like they're cherished even more when they get something that nobody else has and it's more personalized. And over the course of time, you're just going to accumulate so much work that you'll be able to, I don't know, maybe even create a calendar or something and sell it. It's okay to make money off of your work. And I think if that work is wholesome and it has a good message behind it, that's all the better, and it should be out there. So I would like to take this opportunity to encourage you to share more of your work in the community. I've been loving seeing your drawings. And if you are not a member of our Hike and Draw Facebook group, just go to facebook.com/group/hike and draw and join us there. We've been seeing some great work, not only drawings, but photos, small scale models recently, which is awesome. And just really great personal experiences. Even questions are welcome. Post those and continue being involved because we all appreciate it, and it feels really good. And I look forward to logging into the community every day to see what people are up to. So keep it up. Um, so that concludes this workshop. I want to just quickly display a few of the upcoming workshops that we have coming up. I know we're close on time. We have a botanical drawing workshop. We're going to be doing the purple coneflower, which is one of my favorite native species. We're going to be doing, we're kicking off May with a free nature drawing workshop. It's almost filled up, so get over there and sign up fast. May is the month of Mother's Day, so we're going to do a Mother's Day card crafting workshop with a nature theme. That's on the 6th. And if you live in the New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut area, I'm actually teaching a live in-person primitive navigation workshop with my friend Yana's company, Adventure Untamed. And half the proceeds we're gifting to the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. We're going to do a nature drawing in color pencil. I haven't picked the subject yet, but I'm leaning towards either really cool, flashy insect or tropical fish. We're going to work on textures. This time it's going to be scales. So we're going to draw a pangolin the 19th. That happens to be Endangered Species Day, and pangolins are under threat. So this is a great opportunity to learn about those animals, but also to focus on your pencil work and rendering textures. We have a live draw community social with the hike and draw community only. That's on May 20th. And Connor's going to give me his updates soon. So he has a workshop on the 22nd. And then we're closing the month of May with the botanical drawing intro workshop, the Flame Azalea. And thank you, Bev, for that suggestion. So all other details are going to be on the Eventbrite page. Check that out. If you've missed workshops and you wanted to rewatch some of the recordings, go ahead and head over to hikeanddraw.nyc. We have a wonderful membership platform there. It's a subscription-based video archive. So over 24 videos up there right now. Each of those classes are about an hour and a half, some of them even longer. So tons of content to enjoy. I recommend signing up if you want to catch up and learn more. And we made it. Thank you so much, everybody. I know that ending was a little rushed, but I wanted to make sure that we all got to have our dinner on time tonight. So thank you all so much. As always, I appreciate your companionship in this community. It's always great seeing familiar faces, and I want to just wish every one of you from the bottom of my heart a happy Earth Day. Treat every day like Earth Day. Explore it, cherish it, and then pass that knowledge on to others. Thank you all.
Thank you, James.
You're very welcome.
Have a good dinner.
Thanks. I will. Take care, everybody.